In the beginning, there was only one commandment. Do you remember what it was? It was not to love God with all your heart. It was not to love your neighbor as yourself. Love was a given and the source of this gifted creation. The commandment was that humans were not to eat from a tree in the center of a garden. Has that first commandment ever struck you as strange? Maybe even arbitrary? Since the tree was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it does seem clear enough that the first people who told this story had something other than God's literal landscaping choices in mind. But still, don't eat from the tree. That's the first rule. You'd be hard-pressed to name a story in human history that's been told and heard by as many people as that one has. But consider this. Of all the billions who've ever heard it, I'd wager that the number of people who were surprised when the first humans did eat the forbidden fruit is roughly 0. Right? By the time we're old enough to know what a story is at all, we know that if somebody says, don't eat the fruit, somebody's going to eat the fruit. It seems fair to say that with the introduction of that single rule, the game of being human was on. Now don't worry, starting back in Eden doesn't mean there are now 11 points to this sermon on the 10 Commandments. I'm just curious about what commandments are supposed to do in our lives. I'm curious today about what a commandment is even for. Since I happen to be a Christian, I want to name right up front one way I think we Christians have often missed the mark badly on this question, especially us Protestants, I'd say. We've been known to construct the human storyline something like this. In the beginning, things were great. Then came a few rules, which were probably necessary given an original unfortunate turn in events involving the aforementioned fruit tree. We're mostly down with the 10 Commandments. In fact, we occasionally like to engrave them in stone and set them up at courthouses, mostly to spite all those godless unbelievers out there. Even if some versions of the second commandment tells us not to worship engraved images. But after the 10 Commandments, we say things really got out of hand. Those ancient Hebrews couldn't leave well enough alone, and before long there were 613 commandments in the Torah. Fortunately, a first century ethical Marie Kondo named Jesus of Nazareth came along. He got rid of all that Old Testament clutter that brought him no joy and distilled all the rules back down, not just to 10, but to only 2. Love God and love your neighbor. How nice. The moral life got simple and clear and doable again, right? There are so many problems with this way of reading the Bible, starting with the blunt statement by Jesus himself that he had no intention of doing away with a single pen stroke of the law. His teachings were meant only to fulfill it, he says. And that word fulfill in Matthew 5, in Greek and in English, does not mean to get rid of something. It means to fill something up even fuller, right to the top, to make it complete. Jesus didn't say he was going to teach us how to grow out of needing so many commandments and rules to order our lives. He said all of the wisdom of the law and the prophets hang on the commandment to love with every last fiber of your being. The Talmud tells us that no one stands on the word of Torah unless they've stumbled over them. It seems truer to say that Jesus gave us even more to stumble over when he added this commandment of love to every last law in the Torah. We haven't fulfilled a law until we've not only kept it, but filled up the act of keeping it with love. The power of the 10 Commandments, I'd say, and of all the 613 rules in Torah, I think is the way they keep us from pretending that love is something abstract and interior to our lives, or that love is something only relevant to certain parts of our lives. Torah reminded us that love is not a private matter. Love needs to order all of our relationships. Love should order how we worship and what we eat. It should determine the structure of our economy and our property arrangements and how we resolve conflicts and restore broken relationships. Love matters to the way we work and the way we rest. Jesus seemed to want us to stumble over the demands of love in every aspect of our lives. Don't you think that's why he said following him would cost you absolutely everything? I can see a few of you squirming a bit, wondering whether if Jesus didn't exactly cancel the law, you violated a commandment that should still be in effect for Christians when you devoured that shrimp mousse on your salad plate at Waffle Shop last week. Well, there's a lot more to be said and studied on that question. Even old St. Peter's vision in which all creatures were declared clean and edible only went so far. This is just one Christian's take, but it seems relevant to me that the first commandment in the Bible was a commandment made for a particular time and a particular place. I mean, we don't find people after the exile from Eden keeping their eyes peeled for more of those deadly fruit trees, do we? Laws are temporal, not eternal. God and love are eternal, so the rules that order our lives in every place and every time need to hang on love of God and neighbor, just as the law and the prophets did, even if the laws themselves can change and adapt. Here's an overly simplistic example. Maybe it's useful. There is no eternal divine decree about whether cars should be driven on the right side or the left side of the road. But it's quite literally a matter of life and death that any particular society come to a consensus on the matter, and then find ways of enforcing whatever law we agree upon, right? Well, what Jesus and the Torah teach, I think, is that maybe even our traffic codes are ultimately answerable to the law of love. Love should be the measure and the goal of every last rule humans live by in every time and place and culture. Which means, I think, that the making and the keeping of rules could actually be a creative, regenerative process, not only a limiting one. I've been reading slowly through a book titled The Creative Act, A Way of Being, by a music producer named Rick Rubin. Now, Rick Rubin does not look like the type of a rule follower. In photographs, he's usually barefoot in an elegantly spare room furnished only with a meditation cushion, an expensive stereo system, large windows open to the California ocean. His graying beard's about the size of a house cat. He's the epitome of guru chic, I'm telling you. But even Rick Rubin believes that rules are necessary to the creative process. For all the need artists have to push boundaries, rules and limitations are just as essential. A rule, Rick Rubin says, is a way of structuring awareness. A rule is a way of structuring awareness. This actually strikes me as a very biblical understanding of rules. A commandment is not something you're finished with when you've kept it, or something that establishes us as good people if we keep from violating it. The law structured the awareness of the ancient Hebrews and still structures the awareness in different ways for various communities of Jews. And I propose that for Christians as well, the Torah and those 10 Commandments in particular, since they're our text today, can still be a means of making us look at one ordinary aspect of life after another and asking what love would require of us in it. What are commandments for? The same thing they've been for since the beginning. They're for making sure love makes its way into absolutely everything. So here's a proposition for you and me and for the rest of the season of Lent, and hopefully off into the rest of our lives. What if, maybe starting with these old 10 Commandments, we saw the rules we live by not so much as boundaries and walls that protect us, but as windows into the world, as ways of structuring awareness, openings through which we can look at more and more of the life we've been given together on this earth and ask what love would require of us all in all of it. As we read the news and shop for groceries and tend flower beds and vote, as we encounter a stranger in pain and confusion or a friend who's hurt us, as we create something beautiful or enjoy something beautiful made by someone else, as we confront our histories, as well as the dangers and possibilities of the future. What if rather than simplifying the moral life, we let Jesus make it infinitely more complex? Because wherever we turn our awareness next, we know what he's going to ask of us before we do. Once a commandment or a parable, or maybe just life itself has captured our attention, he'll say, now, ask yourself as truthfully as you dare, even of this ordinary aspect of being alive in a world with other people, what does love require of you here? What would love have you do right now? Look at everything in your life through this question, and then live.